the reason why I brought you onto this podcast is because we started a startup together. What was your impression of why it didn't work out?
Well, there's too many reasons, I think.
There's too many reasons? So if someone was to walk up to you and they want to start their own company, what's something that you would tell them?
You need to know this person's like deepest secrets almost. Like, how long did it take you to recover from that summer?
When our startup ended, that was the first time that I started considering and actually going to therapy. Man, this sounds like a toxic relationship. Now that I'm really thinking about it, I'm like, oh, it's okay, you know, they're busy, whatever, right? Like time commitment, whatever, right?
There were trust issues for sure.
Yeah. and then eventually, like the straw that broke the camel's back was. Welcome back to the People Side Podcast, the 5th episode. I'm here with Scott. Do you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Shit, who's even watching this? I don't know how to introduce myself to this crowd. I am Scott, turning 22 this month, realizing that I need to care a little bit more about the people side. That's why I'm on this podcast. I am in school right now studying computer science and business, trying to get good at both technical things and also realizing that soft skills are important. And that's kind of why I did business school a little bit, but really just figuring out what I want to do in this world. And it's probably something relating to building technology, but realizing that I'm not as good as I thought I was.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. Damn. Yeah, well, I think the reason why I brought you onto this podcast is because we started a startup together, and long story short, it didn't work out. Well, I'm sure we'll dive into the details, but I wanted to talk about, you know, like what you said, like the people side of that, like the relationships, like how co-founders work. Because when I first started into like the startup space, like jumped in, a lot of people said co-founders it was kind of like a marriage. Yeah. Right. And I didn't really understand what that. I'm not sure if you understood what that meant at the time, or if you heard the same thing. But no, I didn't understand that.
I'm like, let's jump in, let's get married right away. Let's bring in a third.
Yeah. Damn. But before we get into the details, I wanted to ask you a question, because when we met up a couple weeks ago, so for a bit more context, Scott and I, we were also in the product management club at UBC. You're still in it. I'm not, because I'm graduated. But we met up, and you said that, oh, these days when I meet someone, I just go deep right away. And I was like, okay, like how? And you were like, oh, I just ask them about their child. Can you walk me through how you developed that? Like
I feel like this needs a little bit more background. Why do I just jump right into forming deep relationships? Yeah. And this is not with everyone. This is like, if I feel like that's probably a person who's willing to open up and I want to actually form something with, you know, like 80% of people you meet are not going to be, you know, at that level. But I moved to Toronto last year in May. I'm from a very small town. Toronto is like the biggest city in Canada, so it was kind of freaky to me. Right. But I've realized that my default mode ever since childhood of like, what do I do in my free time is literally just stay in my room all day. And so at some point, it was probably like 6 months into being in Toronto, I still had like no friends, but I was realizing like I need to meet some people in person and find some kind of friendship, whether that's in Toronto or in Vancouver. Like I was just getting bored. I was sick of being in my room all day. And through like some means, someone invited me to some networking event, and I just kept like meeting people and being frustrated that like nothing was happening outside of at these events. Like I meet them, I say hi, and then, you know, maybe we add each other on LinkedIn at the end, and then nothing happens. Yeah. But eventually in like November, right before I was about to leave, like a month later, I met a friend named Kai, and I just, at the networking event, we didn't really hit it off. He was busy talking to some girl there. But then we decided, or I like saw that he had a calendar booking link on his website because I was stalking him a bit. And I booked on his calendar booking link for a meetup in person that Saturday. And as I was on the subway going to meet up with him at a cafe on that Saturday, I just realized that like I had so much curiosity for who he is, because he had started a startup, worked on it for 4 years, and dropped out of school, out of Waterloo to do that. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? You know, I kind of envy him in a way. I want to like get to know him. What is it that makes him tick? Like, who is this person? What led him to be who he is now? And then I can potentially extrapolate that to how I want to make my own decisions. I guess this is just a long-winded way of saying just being very deeply curious about people and not just about, you know, work. We ended up meeting up, and one of the first questions I asked him was like, hey, I'm really curious. Like, after, like, we started with like some small talk. He's like, oh, you're like studying business and computer science, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. I want to know about you though.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. Why is it that you dropped out? What led you to that point? I'm really curious. Like, is there something that happened in your childhood and the way that you were raised that made you feel like this is something that you had to do? And then he basically just told his whole life story. He really got into it. And obviously Kai is someone who's very open anyway.
Yeah.
But there's certain people that you can ask like the right question and they'll just tell you everything because they're longing to tell you, I think. I can be like that sometimes for sure.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work with everyone.
Yeah.
But I've been trying to do that. The like 3 closest friends that I have now have all been developed friendships from the last 5 months, like the last 4 or 5 months that I've really met them, and just started off really deep right away.
I have a cool prompt.
Okay.
What's something that you wanted to ask me back then when we did our startup that you didn't, and maybe I can like ask the same.
Dude, I don't know if there is like a specific thing that I was really wondering at the time. Like I feel like I would have asked it.
Really?
But I didn't have that muscle of like thinking about these kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's almost like,
I'm like, how did you develop that though? You know, it's like it just magically appeared one day. You're making it sound.
Oh no, I'm still working on it. It's a muscle for sure. It's like most people, I think it's not a matter of like I have these questions that I'm not asking, but it's like when I meet someone, I'm actually curious about more than just what they do for their job. And I think for me, it's like the more you do that, the more you realize that people are a lot more than just, you know, their surface level, like what they look like and what they seem to be doing. So when I was working with you a couple summers ago, it was more, okay, this is Andy. He's in integrated engineering. He wants to do startup stuff.
Oh wow. Okay.
He cares about education, and we chat a lot about, you know, ed tech.
That's so interesting how to hear like your way of thinking back then, because I think back then I was also kind of the same. I definitely, like, if I was to answer the question that I prompted this off of, back then I didn't have a really good understanding of mental health. Right? I wasn't as deep into the space as I am in now, but back then I definitely did have the question of like, what is up with Scott?
That was not the best time in terms of my mental health, that's for sure.
Yeah. Because we didn't really talk about it, right? And I was like from my end, like this is what I saw, right? I saw like a very ambitious person who is overcommitted, and a part of me is like, why is he overcommitted? Like does he not recognize that he's overcommitted?
There was one point when we all wrote down how many hours we spend every day on the different aspects of our life. Yeah. And I think I used every single hour possible on work-related things. Yeah. You remind me of myself back then. And then I had like
even now to some, I had like trying to make every hour productive. You know, like
there was like maybe like 5 hours a week. I should probably think about feeding myself. Yeah. Have I changed since then? A little bit, but I mean, I still am pretty ambitious, I think. Yeah.
I think it definitely comes with balance, because at some point, I don't know what it was like for you, but at some point I realized that you would be more efficient / effective in doing things if you did have time to balance things, you know, because like work can only fill up so much. I had this one experience where I needed to, I think, study for something, and I was like, okay, I can either force myself to spend the next, I don't know, like 6 hours studying for this, or I could just spend, 3 hours like doing nothing or doing whatever I wanted and then come back and do. And it was more efficient to do that than it was to just force myself through the full 6 hours. And I developed this, like, I have this thing where I develop a lot of theories around this type of stuff, right? And it's kind of like, what I coined this was like time investing, because with money investing, it's very visible, right? So with money investing, you put in $100. If the stocks go up, then like great, you cash out. You make, let's say you make like $200. You make an extra $100. But if you put in $100 and then you lose $100, then you're at a loss, right? It's very visible. But with time, it's like, okay, if you force yourself to do something for 6 hours, you don't know if that's going to pan out productively. Or if you take a 3-hour break and then go back and then work for 3 hours, like in the moment when you're actually doing it, you see it being effective. It's not like a net gain or a net loss. It's just that whatever the result is what happens. And so it's one of the few things that I've kind of realized back then, because back then I told one of my coworkers, I was like, hey, I want to be 100% productive 100% of the time. And he looked at me and he was like, you're fucking crazy. and I tried to like reason my way out of it. I was like, oh, well, productive can also mean like taking proper breaks every now. Like, I don't really agree with that anymore, right? Like, I think it's not that I completely disagree with it. It's just that there are other things that I've realized that I should do in order to, have a more balanced life, if that makes sense. And that's why when you said the calendar thing, that really reminded me of myself.
I think there's different definitions of productivity in this sense, right? Like, as you were mentioning, it can, maybe the most productive thing to do right now is to go for a walk for an hour, But it all comes down to like, what are you optimizing for in your life right now? Is what you're optimizing for like solely for work? Because I think that's the mindset that you're trying to get away from, is like when you're balanced in a balanced life, it's not just work and work goals that you're working towards, right? It's, you want to be happier or whatever, some shit like that.
Yeah, right? Something like that, yeah.
Care about, significant other or relationships or like dating and yeah, that's an important aspect for sure.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump into the main topic. So
there's topics.
Yeah. What? Well, they're all in my head.
Okay.
So for context, for listeners/watchers, we had a startup that we tried to start. It was through a program called E at UBC, so entrepreneurship at UBC. And the startup was called Edventure. It was a community-based e-learning platform, and we wanted to make learning an adventure, which is why we called it Edventure. Didn't work out.
You're still pitching it.
Yeah. It didn't work out for, I think, like, what was your impression of why it didn't work out?
Well, there's too many reasons, I think.
There's too many reasons. Can you like? I'll start off with like my main ones, and then maybe you can like add on. Like, I think the first was we switched customer segments quite a few times. I think it could have worked out in the end, but we needed more time to do discovery. And with something like a program, if you ever go through an entrepreneurship program, it's really good for setting dates and deadlines and accountability and like keep making sure things are moving, but it doesn't give you not enough time to explore and actually establish like your target audience, your demographic, and actually make sure that you have the time required in order to, build what you want to build. The other thing was, like the co-founders. Like, eventually we had different priorities. Like, I realized for me, like, I was graduated and you guys were still in school. It was me, you, one other person, and you two were still in school. Like, were you just entering first year or second year? I think it was.
I was just finishing first year.
Just finishing first year. Yeah. So university was very like top of mind in your priorities list, and I just realized that the conflicting priorities didn't, it just didn't work out. And so those are my main reasons for why, after like reflecting back on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You summed it up pretty well. Definitely some co-founder struggles, different priorities in life, and also just not knowing what the fuck we were doing.
Yeah.
Like when you talked about like actually doing discovery, figuring out like what it is that we actually want to create. We did like, a lot of it was you, but we did a lot of user interviews, like interviewing people in our target demographic, trying to figure out, are we actually solving one of their problems? Would they even pay for this? And it turns out that I've learned since then that just asking people, hey, would you pay $10 for this hypothetical solution is not actually good data, because people will be like, oh yeah, this is a really cool idea, but doesn't mean that they would actually use it, right? So we didn't really have like a solid hypothesis that we're aiming to test, that we could test in like, a couple of weeks by, building something quickly. We tried, with the Discord server that one time, but we very much like settled on a very large idea of like, hey, we think that online education needs a better community aspect. But we didn't really hone in on like, okay, here's a solution for this that we can actually test, and here's the people who would actually use this solution. And we didn't have the people who would actually use the solution. We kept going to university students, but I don't think they were the right target. So that was like, in terms of, actually thinking about the startup, definitely we didn't know what we were doing. And all the books that I've read since then have been like, shit, this is not how you do discovery.
How would you do it differently if you were to rewind time and do it again? Like, what would you do differently? It doesn't have to be limited to just discovery.
Well, I think you need to be on the same page right from the get-go in terms of co-founders. And
I think that's very difficult. I think a lot of people who say that, they don't really understand the difficulty of being on the right page, which goes back to the quote, like, further together, faster alone. And I think that that's true because when you are with other people, you have to have so many meetings on just being aligned, because like people's minds work differently. And if one person's like mindset like goes in a different direction, even like after a meeting or like for 1 or 2 days, and it like stews, then like assumptions are now all off target. And the reason I'm saying this is because unless you've actually done like a startup or like some sort of group project, but even group projects don't really require people to be completely aligned.
Because there's so much structure.
Exactly.
They give you the decisions that
like the criteria, like what you need and everything. Like it's so difficult because every time you have a meeting, we're like, okay, we're aligned. And then like the next week things can change. So now you have to like spend more time being aligned. So yeah.
It gets exponentially more difficult when there's every time you add another person.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And that our biggest problem probably was that we wanted to get aligned, but not everyone was putting in the same amount of time. And so you were on your own kind of like navigating where the direction that we wanted to go.
Yeah.
But then you had to be like, hey, Scott, here's what I want to do. And you have to explain it to me. And then I have to be like, okay, let's go with it. We have to make that decision together because we're co-founders.
Yeah.
But I definitely would not. I'd be wary of being co-founders when everyone's putting in like different amounts of time.
Yeah. One of the pieces of advice that I got from like mentors in the program is that everyone should either be full-time or part-time. And I didn't agree with that at the time. I didn't agree with that. I was like, no, we can still make this work. Now I do agree with that because it goes back to expectations, right? Like if someone is full-time and the other people are part-time, you can make it work if you really, really try. But eventually, at least for me, right? Eventually it's going to get to the point where I'm like, this is unfair. Like, there's other implications to this, right? Like shareholders agreement, or if you're putting in more time, it makes sense that you get more shares or whatever. But eventually it just feels like you're not in it together.
And can you imagine that we all lived in the same city but never met up once?
Yeah, that was also like, I wonder why. Why was that? Were we just really busy? I was like far out. Like I was not near. Were you guys near UBC or no?
I was on campus.
You were on campus, okay.
But like, what's an hour of time to meet up with your co-founder?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Like one of the other co-founders of this other startup said, I forget if he was a co-founder or mentor, but he said, if I was to find a co-founder, I would go on like a 1 to 3 hour hike with them first, just to like really get to know them. And I think back then for me, like one of the mistakes that I made was I was so focused on execution and just getting things done that I didn't really put the upfront time required to actually get to know someone. Like I didn't really know where you were at. Like I knew that you were busy and you had a lot of things going on, but I didn't exactly know why.
Well, I had a full-time job.
Yeah, that too, right? and I'm like, but why, right? Like is, are you prioritizing balance? Do you just, and then there were times where like going back to that original question, what I asked earlier, which is like, oh, if you were to go back and ask a question, like, was there anything that you wanted to ask but didn't? I wanted to know why you didn't get things done by the time that I expected you to get things done.
Oh, I forgot about this.
Yeah. Because that was something that like really stuck with me, because I remember like, you know, we would have a project or like an assignment or whatever it was by a certain due date. And then there were things like, I think it was like number of interviews or something, right? And then, you know, like I always got mine done, but you and the other co-founder, you know, you guys didn't get yours done. And then I was like, you know what, it's okay. And then like eventually, like, man, this sounds like a toxic relationship. Now that I'm really thinking about it, I'm like, oh, it's okay. You know, they're busy, whatever, right? Like time commitment, whatever, right? We had different time.
There
commitments.
were trust issues for
sure.
sure.
Yeah. And then eventually, like the straw that broke the camel's back was one time. We had a presentation, and it, you know, like keep in mind this has been happening. And then on the day of the presentation, I think like the day before, you said you were gonna get something done, which was required for the presentation, and then it didn't happen. And then so I didn't really pull an all-nighter. I still got like 3 hours of sleep or something, but I basically had to stay up because, you know, it was like past midnight and I didn't hear from you. I'm like, is he dead? Is he still alive? Like, I don't know. So then I just like finished it, and then like when the presentation happened, you weren't there, and it was like the one presentation where you weren't there. And I was like, I felt like on your end, it probably, your like work, you can like jump in, but your workload probably accumulated to the point where it was, I'm guessing, too much. And then, you know, it was either you just passed out or I don't know what it was. But that was the point where I realized like this isn't working out. Yeah.
The thing that I did not account for in my master time schedule of how much time I dedicate to everything is that when you feel like you have a lot of things just stressing you out and providing a lot of anxiety, you need time to just deal with that stress and like decompress. I think I was awake and like wanting to work on it.
Oh, really?
Like
what?
Like I don't think I was like, oh shit, I have to do something for work. Like I think I was like, and I, to be honest, I don't really remember, but I remember just like feeling really stressed and like trying, like wanting to do it, and then just sitting there not doing it. And I felt so guilty that I just didn't even show up.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
God damn. Wow. Because I think like when we talked about it afterwards, you were like, oh, sorry, like my phone was off or something. And I'm like, did you lag? Be honest.
I might have.
No judgment. This is a post-retrospective thing. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And then, but continue. I don't want to steal the spotlight unless you're done saying what you want to say.
No, sometimes the feeling of guilt, this is a problem that I've had, is like, I get into this guilt loop of like me not doing something.
Yeah.
And then I feel guilty that I don't do it.
Yeah.
And then I just like have this guilt sitting in me that makes me less productive because I feel like shit.
Yeah. I
don't get the shit done.
I know exactly what you're talking
so
about.
So then it just gets worse. It's a downward spiral.
Yeah,
and I was totally at the bottom of that spiral that summer.
Yeah. Damn. Wow. Because when I will say that, like, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, I'm right and like you're wrong here, because I remember this one instance where our third co-founder, who we're letting be anonymous, you know, on purpose, because I don't want to like slander him here. I had a disagreement with their third co-founder, and he says something along the lines of health and family are really important. And I didn't agree with that at the time because I was very execution focused. I wanted to get work done. So, you know, I didn't really prioritize that type of stuff, right? Like, you know, like self-health and also like relationships with other people, with family, etc. And so that's something that I didn't have at the time and didn't understand, because it was very like, just do the work, right? Like, don't really focus on anything else. And I don't really think that's healthy, especially when you have co-founders, because if all of you guys are focused just on the work and not really focused on the other areas of your life or relationships, then like the relationships, you know, you have with each other kind of like fall out, because you don't have this like open line of communication that you can have with each other. And so I think that is something that if I was to go back and do better, I would. Yeah.
And going back to what we were discussing earlier, understanding each other on a deep level would have been really valuable.
Yes.
Like actually building the trust before.
Yeah.
Like if we were actually friends before, like you and I a little bit were, but you didn't. I was friends with both of you, and then I introduced us together to do a startup and work together, but we never really once were like, hey, let's like hang hang out,
Yeah.
get dinner, like
Yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
go like to do this event
like,
together.
That I never even considered that.
No.
And now it's like the most obvious thing to do, right? Yeah.
It's like at work when they have those socials.
Yeah.
I'm like, but like they're actually important.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from my end, I was actually in somewhat of a rush to put this team together, which was another one of the, I guess, points of reflection from starting the startup, right? Like if you should never rush putting together a team. Like that's not a good recipe for success. I was in the program, the entrepreneurship at UBC program, and I decided that I wanted to leave the current startup that I was in, right? And in order to do that and then still remain in the program, I'd have to find like, a whole other startup idea and some other people. And so I had an idea, right? Like at the time, like I feel like I always have ideas. And so it was just a matter of finding the right people. And I don't know how, but I found you and we talked a bit and I was like, oh, he's really into the education space. And so, like, I had ideas around that. We talked, and then you introduced me to another person, right? Through a co-founder, and I was like, okay, great, we got a team right here. And I was like, right, like you said, like in hindsight, we should have spent more time actually getting to know each other, because when problems arise, which problems always arise during teams, it's especially important for a co-founding team to be able to have enough trust in each other to actually talk about those issues, and not at like a surface level, like, oh, I didn't really get enough sleep late night, but like more like a, hey guys, I'm feeling fucking depressed because of school and all these other commitments. Okay, I don't know if like, and so like, yeah, like I agree with what you said. It was something that was definitely missing.
How long did it take you to recover from that summer?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say a month on paper, which is like, startup ended. I talked with like, I don't know if I ever told you, but I talked with a lot of different people to help me decide what to do, because I was like, that incident happened with the you're not showing up to the presentation, and then I was like, okay, this isn't working out, but what do I do? And so I talked with a bunch of people, and then I basically made the decision, right? Like we talked about it, we made the decision. We were like, all right, we're gonna finish up at least this phase of the program, and then probably see if it's going to work out, which it didn't. And then for me, on the reason I say on paper is because I spent a month not really doing anything, because I was just like it affected me, right? I was like, fuck, like I failed this, right? It felt like a failure, and I was like, what do I do now, right? Do I go back into corporate? Do I do I still go into dev? Like, what do I do? And so I spent a month just kind of like doing nothing, really, being depressed, if I was going to be honest. And then I had a trip to Calgary to visit family, and then I came back. And then during that time, that's when I started looking for jobs, because I was like, I cannot just spend this time doing nothing forever. And so eventually I did get a job, and that job was like a month after. There's a month gap, right? And so on paper, it was like a month. But I feel like it probably took a bit longer than that. Maybe like a month/a month and a half, because after, like, when I started the job, like my headspace was occupied with just like succeeding at the job, right? But in actuality, yeah, like if we're talking about just the startup, I would say like a month to 2 months. If we're talking about the relationship between me and you, I would say a lot longer.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Maybe like, I don't know, like a year or something.
I remember some long messages back and forth afterwards.
Yeah. I think I sent you a message or something after I realized, like, oh, okay, I can kind of see where he was coming from now. I understand mental health better. Yeah. How long did it take you to recover?
Man, I was kind of at the bottom of that spiral for a while, though.
Oh, really?
Going back to school helped a little bit, of course. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, I didn't really like school anyway. That's what I was trying to do for entrepreneurship. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel like I've been better the last couple of months. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's hard to say what I want to account to this whole startup and everything else that was going on in my life at that point in time. But yeah, it might have been a couple of years, to be honest.
Let's see. Wow.
Yeah.
What would it look like in terms of like recovery steps for you?
I just kept following the same habits for so long of like procrastinating on stuff until the last minute, feeling guilty. Yeah. Got behind on school again, and that was like a really shitty time. It wasn't really until I moved to Toronto that I was like, I got figure some shit out.
Oh, I see.
I think. But I was kind of stuck in that in Toronto for like a long time. Really, it wasn't until like the last few months, I'll be honest.
Really. But like, what did you do to kind of like get out of it?
What did I do?
Or maybe there was a like inciting incident.
Yeah, there was an inciting incident.
Want to talk about it?
I'm considering.
You're considering it? Okay, we can always cut it out. If you don't want to talk about it.
I went through a breakup at the beginning of this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And honestly, that was like the one thing that was like, shit. Now everything changed. Everything changed. And that's when, it wasn't until then that I started prioritizing like going outside and, friendships, with people other than my girlfriend. Yeah. And, I think back to like, here's a bit of a contrast. A year ago when I was in school, I was basically never going to class. And I would intentionally, like avoid the business school building because I didn't want to bump into people that I knew, because they might be like, oh, like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. And I wanted to avoid that. Oh, why aren't you in class? I wanted to avoid that.
Yeah.
I was just in my room all day. Yeah. Literally, like sometimes for like a week straight.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
And now, like a year later, I literally like intentionally walk through that building to bump into people that I might recognize or that, want to chat about something. Whenever I see like an event that I might be interested in, I'm like, all right, I'll go there. Like I prioritize these things. Yeah. Because I know that that's going to help me. And like after the breakup, I literally called like 20 of my friends that weren't really like that. I wasn't really that close with, like, or some of them I was a little more close, and just talked a lot. A lot of talking, a lot of writing, and a lot of walking around outside. Like, here's another stat. My step count in Toronto, because I have an Apple Watch, so it like tracks it. My average in Toronto was like 3,000 steps a day, which is like pretty low. Since then, it's like my average for the last like 3 months has been over 10,000. Wow. So like literally tripled.
Wow. Okay. Damn. Wow. Because I also have a step tracker, but I don't use it as often. So that's damn. Yeah. You got around in Toronto, eh?
In Toronto, I didn't, but in Vancouver, like as soon as I moved back to campus.
Yeah.
And
I see.
And it's like I said, my habits completely changed. I've been trying to do like, I don't go to the gym that often, but I'll go like indoor bouldering with a friend as well. Yeah. Just like exercising, walking outside, talking to people, like the basic things.
Yeah. It's the basic things that really like, because I also have issues with going outside. Like I don't know if it is the same for everyone, but sometimes I will feel significant friction just leaving the house. Yes, and I'm like, I don't know why. Like I have roommates and they just leave the house. They're like, okay, I'm gonna go on a walk, and they just leave the house, and I'm just like that doesn't always happen to me. And I could probably like backward analyze why that's a thing, but I've also had instances where I just like stay in my room, maybe not for like a week straight. I feel like I'd go insane at that point. So like
that was more of the extreme, but usually like at least 3 days.
Yeah. And going outside is something that I've also been trying to get better at, because it does do a lot of good things that aren't initially visible, right? Like sunlight, social interaction. You see people walking around, you're like, oh, I'm not the only one in this world. That's a good one. Yeah. So that's also something that I've been trying to get better at as well.
Also, looking at a screen for 16 hours a day is also not really the best.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So if someone was to walk up to you and they're like, like somewhat young, and they're interested in the startup space, right? They want to start their own company, and they ask you for advice, specifically with co-founders, what's something that you would tell them?
You need to know this person's like deepest secrets, almost like you don't need to, but it sure as hell helps when conflict arises. Yes. And you're like, you can approach it with empathies, like I understand what led this person to be like that now, and you can help them through it. Like the relationship should be developed before founding a company together. As we were told, like this is like marriage, Yeah. But what does that mean? It means that you're committed to each other and to what you're working on, right? Like if the first idea sucks and fails, like are you going to be still working together. And you need to go through like a ton of questions of asking each other, like, what's going to happen under this scenario before you even get started, I think. Like, do we care about how much money we raise? What happens if we don't get any traction in the first 4 months? You know, like how long of a runway do you have? You know, like, what are we even in this for? I don't think we asked each other really these questions.
Yeah, we definitely considered the worst case scenario in terms of like, oh, if this startup was to stop, like, what would happen, right? Like, if this startup was to succeed, what would happen? Like, how are we going to do the split, right? Like the shareholder split for the startup.
I would say if you're a first-time founder, like if you're experienced in like, you can probably like work remotely and like get shit done. You're more mature. But if you're a first-time founder, a good metric to think about is like how many hours you just like spend in the same room with this person, with your co-founder, and like actually working together. Like, because if it's not happening in your schedule, then like nothing's really getting done. It's more of a side project at that point.
Yeah.
But like, if it's a side project, but you have these big aspirations of it being something better, and there's like an imbalance of like one person really wants it to work, another person just thinks of it as a side project, it's probably not going to work out.
Yeah. I think jumping on that, I think priorities, if I was, so I'm gonna give two categories of answers. The first one is gonna be just speaking from my experience, like, you know, the experience that we had. And then the second category is going to be speaking more generally. So I think from our experience, priorities is very important, right? Like understanding where people are at and what their priority is. Don't like either go full time. Like if you have co-founders, everyone has to be in it full time, or everybody has to be in it part time. Like if you had time like I did, don't do it full time, even if you want to. Like just do it part time and then find, I don't know, like a part time job or like something else on the side, because eventually it's going to get to the point where you feel like it's unfair. So I think that's part number one. And then the second part is like, if you are relatively young, it may be difficult to find people who fit these things that we're talking about, because from my, like in hindsight, from what I see, when you're in school, mental health and these types of things are not really a priority until they need to become a priority, right? So it's like some people can just grind through school, they can just get things done, and there's a certain amount of, I guess you could call it like, you know, call it self-help, personal development, whatever you want to call it, to get to a point where you can actually open up and talk about these things. Because I remember when we had our like shareholder agreements discussions, I was afraid of a lot of the questions, right? I was afraid of like, oh, how are we going to do the split, right? Because like money was like a touchy topic, right? Like I knew that I was putting in more time, right? I was like, how do we
there shouldn't be touchy topics.
Yeah.
It should be very transparent.
Yeah. Like that's a good measure.
You should never be hiding things from your co-founders.
Yeah. Like you should feel comfortable saying things like, oh, you know, like I'm not comfortable about this topic, and then like actually be able to talk about that instead of, you know, like keeping it to yourself and just being like, just accepting like whatever people throw at you. Like, I don't remember if this was the case, but I remember someone suggesting, you know, it being like a equal split at the start, right? Like 33% because there were 3 people. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, no, that's not fair, because I am putting in more time than you guys. Why should it be an equal split? And that was something that I just didn't bring up. And so I think the ability to express how you feel and then also talk about things that you may not be comfortable wanting to talk about is very important in, I would say, any kind of relationship, but more so a co-founder than anything, because it's going to happen. Like, you're going to run into problems. And so I think that is what I would say from my experience. More generally, yeah, just get to know the person. Like, it's go hang out with them and like ask them deep questions. And I feel like that's also why I've gotten more into this space, because not only do I want to level myself up, but I know that in the future, if I do need a team, or if I do want to work on something with someone, like, you can get a lot more done with more than one person. You're going to need the ability to answer these questions and to ask these questions and to get to know someone. So I feel like that would be my answer. It's going to be difficult if you're in school, though. I would say if you're in school, you know, maybe do it. Don't have too high expectations. Do it for the experience.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, one thing you can try is that just work on a project together for like a week or like a hackathon on a weekend, right?
Yeah, like a trial run. Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
You don't have to commit right away, and just see how you work together under pressure when there's a time constraint, and maybe you realize that it's not going to work out because you guys can't even like get shit done when you have to make a decision. So I mean, do that.
Yeah. What really surprised me when I went to UBC for that UBC Product Management Club mentorship event, I forget what it was called, but is that the mental landscape at universities is changing. It is so different from when I was there. Like,
really, in just a couple of years.
Yeah, in just a couple, because when the different teams presented their like product ideas, a lot of them were, talked about mental health, right? Some of them like openly talked about like depression. There was this one person on the team that talked about his experience with his parents and expectations and going to university. And so all this stuff would have been like a faraway dream in my time at university, because the stuff was seen as like taboo, like mental health. Like when they say like, oh, we're trying to remove the stigma around mental health, like I feel like that was the first time that I saw it and felt it, because I was like, oh wow, people are just a lot more comfortable talking about this stuff. And so yeah, who knows, like maybe that will also help this co-founder situation, or this co-founder relationships, because if people are more open to talking about this, then that just means more ways to learn tools to be vulnerable and to be comfortable like talking about your mental health and what you're going through.
So a lot of people are more prioritizing that now in university. For you, like you went through engineering program, which is not necessarily known for thinking about relationships as much.
Very logical. Yeah. Super logical. Very analytical. Yeah.
At what point did it hit you that like you should start caring about the people side?
I don't think it hit me until after university. In university, it was very focused on just getting grades. Sometimes I look back at some of my interactions and I'm like, I don't even know how I'm still friends with some of these people, because like, oh my God, I'm like, I would not do that back then when I did that. I would not do that now. And so after university, it became a lot harder to make friends. And that's because university creates, like, I've said this on a previous podcast episode, if you're in university, you don't really know how good you have it, because there are so many things university gives you that you don't get in regards to like making friends and meeting new people and all that you don't get when you're done, right? Like you get a common topic to talk about. You always have a common topic to talk about, right? You're in the same university, you're in the same, like if you're in the same grade, if you're in the same class, you have the same prof, like you always have a common topic to talk about. And when you're out in the real world, you don't have that. You meet someone, you might not even have the same job. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is like a common physical place to gather at, right? Classes, campus.
On a recurring basis.
It's so important. Yeah, on a recurring basis. And so I realized it like what you said before, it wasn't a one incident. It was a multiple incidences, right? Like I think the interaction that we had, that for me, that was when I was done university, that was one of them. There were times in university when I wanted to get better at my social skills, right? Like when I started the UBC Archery Club, I was like, at some point I was like, I'm running these meetings very like, kind of like a robot, like just here's the agenda, talk about it, done, right? Like not much else. And so I was like, yeah, I wanted to get better. I wanted to become more of like an extrovert. And then the making friends thing, because when you leave university, it's kind of like a filter, because the friends you make in university, not all of them are going to stick around. Some of them were only there because your common topic was school. And when you're done university, school is no longer a thing. So the people side stuff, all this relationship stuff really hit me after, because I realized that relationships should be an important part of my life. Because in school, you're so focused on school and getting all that work done that you don't really have the mental space to think about all this other stuff. But when you're out in like the quote unquote real world and you have a job, you suddenly have more time to think, and you're just like, damn, like you start realizing things that you miss through one way or another, right? It could be like, for me, it was like feeling lonely as fuck all the time, sprinkling a bit of depression here and there. And so, yeah, it was like your body has like pretty amazing ways of telling you when something is wrong. And I think in school, at least for me, like in school, I just ignored all of it because I was just like, I need to get this shit done. And, you know, it doesn't matter if I feel like shit right now. I just need to get it done because grades, deadlines, you know, all these other things, expectations. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer of saying it hit me after school, after university. Yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of people in school, they have this common topic of school, but I think this, from what I've seen, like coming back to university after 8 months away is a bit of a problem for some people, in that like every time I go up to people, they're just like, oh, how are you doing in this course? Mm-hmm. Hey, what grade did you get? Or like, how was this, you know, how do you feel about this, you know, professor? And it's like, I don't care about this shit. Like I pivot the conversation topic as soon as I can to something like a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah. But how do you do that? Like, give me an example.
I kind of just, they might be like, oh, how did you do on this assignment? Or like, how do you feel about the grades that came out recently? Mm-hmm. And I just kind of like shrug it off and then be like, you know, what's new in your life, or what's been on your mind lately? And then try to dig a little bit deeper through that. Mm-hmm. Just like, or I'll bring it up myself. I'll find a way to be vulnerable.
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes people just need that opening because no one's giving them that prompt of like, hey, it's okay to talk about something a little bit deeper than school, or than like, how do I get an internship? Like those are the two topics that everyone seems to approach me with.
Mm. What do you do with people who don't take that opening?
I just don't have a second conversation with them. Like I don't follow up with them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or like it ends up being a 5-minute chat, and then, you know, I don't follow up and be like, hey, I really enjoyed getting to know you, and we should, you know, hang out here together next. Like that's what I might do if I actually really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Would you say that your bar for relationships has changed?
Yes. I think there's still value in like having acquaintances. Mm-hmm. But I've noticed that I won't put time into a friendship if they're not willing to open up or willing to like spend time doing things together. Mm-hmm. Then I'll just be like, all right, you know, I'll find someone else to really invest in a friendship together with. Mm-hmm. There's some people where I'm like, hey, do you want to go do X? And they just jump on it right away. Yeah. And those are the kind of people I'd rather, you know, be friends with, I think, at this point.
Yeah. In university, one time I went to a networking event, and it was my first networking event. And so I went on YouTube. I was like, you know, like, how do you network as a networking event, right? You know, like first time, right? You try to like, you know, get good at the stuff that you do for the first time. So, and the video gave me like really basic things, right? It helped to some degree. It was like, oh, approach people. Don't be afraid to approach people, right? Don't be afraid to smile. Don't be afraid to make jokes. And, you know, like I tried it to some degree, and if I feel like this is what I wish it told me. When you go to a networking event, how you actually establish relationships, right? And this is kind of on the topic of like talking about deeper things, is you talk about things that aren't necessarily related to the networking event. Like if the networking event is a job fair for tech, like on the top of everyone's mind is like, how do I get a job? You know, if I talk to this person, can I get a job? But I feel like to create an actual connection, it's not just the job. It's whether or not you vibe with the person. And I feel like this is like teetering on the edge of like manipulation, but in some degree, it's just kind of how relationships work. If you talk to someone and you guys vibe, and there's a lot of common things, you just have a lot of things in common, they're just more likely to like pass you a job opportunity. And then if you keep in touch, then you have more things to talk about than just the job, right? Like I remember this one friend, he was really into tennis, and we went to the same networking event, and then we met up at the end. And I felt like he succeeded a lot more than I did, even though I like, you know, approached more people. But he was like, oh, I met this one really chill guy, and like turns out like he was also Russian and he was also into tennis, and you know, we talked about that for a bit, and I got his contact info. And I'm like, that really struck me, because now he can follow up with him and, talk about things that aren't just the job. Because if we take out all relationships / emotions out of a networking event, it's very straightforward. You go up to someone and you ask them, hey, are you hiring? and then they either say yes or no. And if they say yes, just be like, can I give you my resume? And then you give them a resume, and that's it, right? Like very clean, dry, like very cut and dry, very logical, like no really emotions or like relationships. But to do networking, I don't want to say to do networking properly, but if you want to have substance or context to follow up on and build an actual relationship with the person that you're talking to, common points, like things you have in common, are really important. And I think that is a better approach than just like approaching a bunch of people at once and just trying to get a job, unless that is your priority. Like if that's it's like you gotta, I guess, pick your battles to some degree here, because if you are planning on getting a job, there's nothing wrong with just walking up to people and being like, hey, are you hiring? That's a very efficient way to do things. But if you can combo the two together and ask that at the end, right? Like get to know the person, see if you have things in common, see if you vibe. And then at the end, just be like, are you hiring? I'm looking for this job and you seem like a chill person. I think they're a lot more likely to pass you an opportunity if they have one. And that's my take on networking, I guess. Yeah, I don't really see it as networking anymore, more so as like just getting to know people.
I went to a shit ton of networking events in Toronto.
Yeah.
That didn't land me any friendships or anything.
Really? Okay.
And I mean, these weren't really job fairs. It wasn't like trying to get a job.
Yeah.
I already had one.
Yeah. But
I kind of was very much in the same state as you at the beginning, which was I walked up to people, you kind of get better at introducing yourself through repetition, but it was always just like, I'm studying business and computer science, and like that leads down this, path every time of like, oh, what is studying at UBC like? I heard Vancouver is really great. Is it rainy a lot there? Like, it's always the
boring
same
topic.
It's always
Next.
the same shit. Yeah. And now I've realized that at a networking event, the goal should be like quality over quantity. Like, try to find one or two people that you really want to reconnect with. Mm-hmm. Not like 30 people that you practice saying hi to, which is, valuable to practice your intro, but aim for those one or two that you really want to reconnect with, and then put in the time to follow up with them afterwards. And then it won't feel as daunting when it's like, okay, just need to like find someone that I vibe with here. And it's worked out for me. I've literally like I met my best friend at an networking event. So
yeah. Do you have, like, from your experiences in doing so, it's pretty easy to say, find quantity over quantity, but do you have anything that you look for, or anything that you'd want to pass off from all that experience to people who may be going through the same thing? Because usually I find with these things, advice is somewhat general, and I'm the type of person that's like, please break that down for me. Yeah.
I think when I'm in conversation with the person, and this goes back to the curiosity thing, how curious am I about this person? Are they someone who I feel like I could talk to for a long time? And if they are, don't lose that opportunity to, reconnect with them and get outside of this networking event and like, I don't know, go to a coffee shop, go grab lunch, go work on a project together. Like there's a number of things that you could do. For me, it was when I was in Toronto in November when I met Kai that I was like, I approached him, and a little bit nerdy, but he was talking about Obsidian, which is like a really specialized note-taking app. Yeah. And I happen to use the same note-taking app. So I'm like, wow, someone else actually has this unique thing in common. And I found out that he like dropped out of school, and I'm like, I've considered dropping out of school before. Like, why did he do that? There's some people you talk to, it's like, there's a lot more under the surface that you really want to know, and you feel like you can learn something from them. Those are the kinds of people that I think you should reconnect with, and not necessarily just like, are they a good match of like skill sets, or like, you know, like actually understand them as a person. That's kind of my approach. I haven't done it that much, but it's worked out so far. At another event, I met some stand-up comedian who is also a product manager, but used to be an accountant.
Whoa, okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder how her experience with comedy interacts with her experience with being a PM. And because in product management, it's very much like developing relationships and understanding the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
And if you are a stand-up comedian, you're probably very comfortable with, you know, going up in front of people, you know, using humor to connect. And so I'm like, I'm really curious about this. So what are you curious about? If you can have that mentality going into it, rather than like, what can I just gain from them? I think that's the right way to approach it.
Yeah. I think how people make you feel is also another one too. Like, I feel like we're both pretty logical. And I think if you're listening to this and you are a logical person, then you might sometimes not listen to your intuition or your gut, right? Like, some people, they make you feel like you just want to share more. Or like you said, like, you can ask them almost anything and they'll answer, right? They feel like very open. Some people feel a bit more distant. Some people feel a bit more cold. Some people feel more warm, and like, you can talk to them about anything. Like, you kind of trust them even though you barely know them. And so I think that feeling that is generated, it's almost like different types of energies. Like, I've talked to someone that I met from this men's group that I was in, also from at UBC too. I first met him at UBC, and he says that the way he describes people these days are through like energies, like, you know, like the warmth or like the coldness. And I just found that really interesting, because going into networking events and looking out for that is something that I've never really done before, but I've been more mindful of these days. I used to be the type of person who, during networking events, would try to add as many people as I could on LinkedIn. Even through school events or whatever, like trying to add people either on Instagram or on Facebook Messenger, because it was a matter of like quantity, like you said, not quality. And what I realized after a while was, I went through my Instagram feed and I was like, who the fuck are these people? Like, I was like, who the, and then like, and so I came up with strategies for that too, which is, like, after you meet someone and you connect with them, send them a message, like being like, hey, you know, really cool meeting you at like this event, so that you don't forget. But then, you know, like, the same problem arises, right? Which is, if you send them a message, sure, now you might remember where they're from, but if they didn't stand out to you personally in terms of like things you have in common or in the beginning, then why add them? And so these days, I hold back on that, because I don't want to just add people for the sake of adding people. I want to add people because they're interesting, or I want to actually get to know them. And so there's that. How did you find out that Kai like dropped out of school and started a startup? Was it something that he just mentioned? And this question is like leaning towards the direction of like figuring things out about people to test the vibe. Because when you meet them for the first time, there's only so much you're going to get to know about them, right? So,
but if you can find one thing that's like, this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. There's probably something deeper here. Maybe they allude to something. Then you can dig deeper into that. You're like, hey, I'm really curious about this, about you. And I think people are a lot more receptive when you are like, I'm curious about this, about you. And not just, I'm curious about, say they're a product manager, I'm curious about this aspect of your job, or like, you know, what does it mean to be a product manager? No, but I'm curious about, you know, why you chose this path, or like something like that. Is like, make it about them. People like to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Should we change the topic?
What do you want to talk about? Pick something you want to talk about.
Pick something I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I feel like you went through some shit.
Real? Okay. You want to talk about me now? All right.
What prompted you to be like, because everyone I talk to is, or
you're like, oop, gotta change that sentence, don't want to offend people.
No, I'm just thinking about wording. Most people are very closed off with the public about, you know, how they are feeling right now, or even just like what their day looks like. Like they're not comfortable with sharing. They'll share with their close friends. What prompted you to be like, all right, I'm going to go all out. I'm going to like post on Instagram every day, like show videos of me dancing, which is like a pretty vulnerable thing to do.
Yep.
You know, share your life. You know, because you did this in university before even going like full on caring about relationships.
Yeah. I want to answer your question, but I also want to ask you a question first.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. About me. There's a difference in me now from me back then, right? What is that difference to you? Like, how have I changed? And then I'll answer your question.
It's really tough because this is a tough one to answer just because it's like, it's been a couple of years. I've never met you in person before. Now I see you in person. We're actually talking about non-work things. Other than you just exploring, you know, relationships more. You seem to me like a little bit more of a holistic person.
Okay.
Like more well-rounded, more thoughtful about other people. And yeah, I would say that's the number one thing is like when you are approaching someone now, it seems like you are really curious to learn about them and like what's going on, like just like what we've been talking about, like what's going on under the shell, under other people's skin, and really prioritizing other aspects of your life. And you seem a lot more just comfortable with life and, you know, knowing what's important to you, but like you can sit back and be like very relaxed, I think now.
I see.
Yeah. Does that feel accurate to you?
I feel like I have high expectations of myself, and so when you say that, I'm like, yeah, no, I can see that. But at the same time, I also have days where I have no fucking clue what I'm doing with my life, and I'm just like, where am I going? What am I doing?
I think that's a lot of people.
Yeah. So yes, I would say that is accurate. I would say that, and I'll give an analogy or like a point of contrast. In the past, there was this one instance where we were talking on Discord, because that's where we did our like startup stuff. And I was just like, I forget if I was just worried or if I was just like ranting out ideas. But you were like, Andy, just take a breath. Do you remember this?
I don't know.
You don't? Because I remember this. And I took a, and then so I just, you know, like I took a deep breath, and then I was like, oh, it feels a lot better. And then I like approached it in more of like a calm manner. And so I think back then it was very like go focused, right? I still feel like my mind works at like 1,000,000 miles per hour sometimes. But yeah, like that stood out to me as a memory because it showed how, I guess, like focused on work I was and not really focused on other things like relationships or just like calming the fuck down every like now and then. Your question, which was what prompted me to do so, I feel like inherently I've always been interested in deeper topics, like consciously or even not, because one of my friends said once, he was like, oh, you post a lot of things on Snapchat. This was back when like Snapchat was still like in fashion. and he was like, oh, you should be a YouTuber. And I was like, oh, what? No, that's ridiculous, you know, absolutely absurd. And then here we are now. And so I think with the Instagram thing and with dancing, it was definitely a way for me to keep myself accountable. But it was also because like I posted those things and wrote those things because I didn't really have people to talk to about these topics. And so it was like an outlet of sorts.
Yeah.
And I feel like in today's society, at least in the West, I can't really speak for the East, but I've heard it's like less like this there because I don't live in the East, I live in the West. It's very individualistic, right? It's very like focused on you, focused on like the individual person. And I feel like a lot of people these days, they don't really have, you know, friends or like close friends or people that they can talk to about more vulnerable things. And so if I was to like look back, I don't think that's why I consciously did it back then. I think I just did it because like, you know, I felt like I was posting these vids for accountability, and I was like, oh, might as well just like add something for me to like reflect back on in the future, right? Like I think that was the reason why I did that in the past. And the reason I started streaming on Twitch was also because of accountability.
It was like a personal journal of sorts as
exactly.
Well.
Yeah. So that's why I did it back then. But the reason I'm more interested in this stuff now is because A, it's just interesting to me, right? Like I've been in personal development more or less for the past few years now. And also when we stopped doing our startup, when our startup ended, that was the first time that I started considering and actually going to therapy. Because I was like, I feel like shit. And a couple of weeks went by and I'm just like, okay, nothing is changing. Then I realized that the UBC, the UBC insurance plan ends on August. So if you graduate, it doesn't end because you still have like 4 months to like use up all your money. And so, all those things together, I was like, yeah, why not, right? Like, might as well like try it out, right? Because one of my friends suggested it and I was like, that's absolutely ridiculous, right? Why would I talk to another person about my problems when I can just figure everything out myself, right? And then so that's when I like started looking into it. And I went through a couple iterations because like, when you go find like a counselor or a therapist for the first time, like the relationship that you have with them is very important, right? You have to trust them to a point where you feel comfortable opening up. And so I've like cycled a couple therapists at this point, but that was the first time that I went and into therapy, and that led me to other things. Like that led me to, not directly, but it led me to more deeper topics like men's groups. Like there's different types of therapies. There's different ways to understand how people work. There's a whole emotional side that I have yet to explore because I'm very logical. And so because I'm more aware of these things are what I am curious about when I meet other people, right? I'm like, whenever I meet other people, I'm like, oh, are they more logical or are they more emotional? How does this affect their day-to-day life or interactions? And so this stuff has just become more interesting to me because I feel like leveling up and accomplishing things from a personal development perspective has always felt very fun to me. And as I get deeper and deeper into this space, I'm just naturally more curious about relationships and how people work. All right, we're back after a break. So yeah, do you want to continue off of what we talked about? So this is about you and your co-founder, and you guys work differently because he works better off of intuition and you work more logically.
Yeah, so I just got into starting a company again with a couple of friends, trying to take the lessons from what we did and be like, all right, we should actually be friends first. Being very careful about like, okay, if this is a 3-person team, we all need to be like able to really work together one-on-one with each other and like as a group of 3. So how do you do that, right? How do you know that they're the right person and that you're actually committed?
Or more so, like, I'm curious because you said that, Kai, this person you met in Toronto, he works more off of intuition, like he doesn't think as much.
Yeah, so my co-founder Kai is like, I'm very analytical, very much thinking about the words I'm going to say before I say them.
Yeah.
Whereas he just jumps into things, but he's always doing something. But every decision he makes is pretty much just based on intuition, based on he's exposed himself to so much over the last several years that he just like has a strong sense of what is right and what he wants to do. Whereas, Harrison and I, the other co-founders, are very much, all right, we got to map things out. We got to plan, like, this is the decision we want to make. And so we were had a little bit of I wouldn't say a conflict, but a point at which we had to make a decision earlier this week about whether or not to pivot our idea to something different. Because Kai had been doing a lot of customer research, going out to events, talking to potential customers, demoing our product, asking them if they'd buy like right now and if they'd like to use it. And he hadn't been getting the best results back. A lot of people were like, this is a really cool product, but we're not really sure if we'd use it over what our existing solution is.
Yeah.
And so then Kai brought this up. He's like, all right, I think it's time to pivot. I have an idea of what we should do instead. And then Harrison and I were like, well, we still really like our solution. We feel like we haven't fully tested it out. It's only been a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Why not, give it like our all first and really see what happens.
Yeah.
And we were in this room and we knew we had like a few hours to like, discuss this and figure out what we want to do next. And I was pretty open to anything. That's kind of, I'm generally just a very flexible person. I'm trying to be more opinionated in general, but I was not sure. So sometimes when you're like at a point where you need to make a decision and there's like one person's like, this is the decision you can tell that they're really leaning towards one, even if they're being open.
Yeah.
They're like, they would be disappointed if their choice was not chosen.
Yeah, yeah.
And they wouldn't be fully committed to the choice that we make. So at that point, I'm like, all right, I don't think it's best for us to like make this decision right now. Let's actually just discuss, what do we want out of this startup first? So I got out my whiteboard markers on the whiteboard. Yeah. We're like, all right, what do we want out of this? From like, what are we optimizing for? Because that's how you make a decision at the end of the day. Like, what are your values? What are we trying to achieve at the end of the day? And everyone kind of shared their own of like, for Kai, it was more like valuing financial stability. So if this idea is not as financially viable, or like it's not obvious how we make money from it,
yeah,
then, you know, he wouldn't be on board with it necessarily. And for Harrison and I, one thing that we agreed on is like, we really just want to like learn a lot from the experience. And I think we all value like building something that makes an impact on the world. But we had to like first understand that Kai wants to prioritize the finances a little bit, because if you prioritize that, where it's like you have a baseline of like, hey, we're actually making revenue from this startup,
yeah,
then you can choose to be like, okay, let's actually, you know, have a little bit more fun with this. Let's experiment a bit more. Let's try to really make an impact on others. But if you're not making that revenue first, then like, and that matters a lot to one of your co-founders, then they're not going to be like able to be comfortable with, you know, trying on a bunch of other things if they can't even like make ends meet, right? So that was like a bit of a point of conflict. And instead of just making the decision, we first had to understand like where everyone is coming from.
Did you make the decision yet or no?
We made the decision to go with, we're going to give our current idea, like it's all for like at least a week.
Time box.
And see what happens.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're going with. And, you know, one thing that was proposed was like, oh, we could like try both ideas at the same time. Yeah. You know, one person's like really dedicated to one. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, I know.
That's really just going to be like causing conflict.
You're basically like, splitting your team.
Yeah.
And you're on the same team. So that doesn't sound like a good route. Yeah.
And I think this is probably the safest thing, because like if this first idea doesn't work, then at the end of the week, we're going to be like, oh, it doesn't work. Okay. Now we're all very comfortable with going to the second idea. So I'm pretty comfortable with where we landed, and everyone seems to be on the same page. But these are not skills that I had, you know, 2 years ago when we were working together.
Yeah. Like I think your takeaway there, if I was to kind of summarize, is when working with people with different mindsets or different worldviews, it's important to understand where they're coming from and why they have the opinions that they have, instead of just going off of the opinions themselves. Because it sounds like the conflict was around whether or not you wanted to try a different idea or a different variation of your current idea, and different people have different opinions about that. And sure, you can back them up with facts and logic, but which is like, funny enough, that's where like my head went to, right? It's like, give me the analysis on that, right? Give me the, you know, like, oh, we talked to these many people and like, you know, this percentage of customers wanted to, right? But I think it's also important to like facts and logic are important, but it's also important to understand, you know, like where people are coming from, right? Like I guess you could say like the people side of like their opinions, right? Because, and understanding what people values is a good step in that direction. So yeah, I think that was good. You know, it's a good way to talk about. You guys basically just talked about it, and then like came to an agreement. Yeah,
but not just on this solution versus this solution, but like stepping back. You know, why are we even here in the first place?
Yeah. Cool. All right. So to end, this is similar to the last podcast.
This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, for people who are listening, I'm holding a game called We're Not Really Strangers. This is the Friends edition. So there's different levels for cards. So you can pick a set of cards, and then I can pick a set of cards, and then I'll pick one to ask you, and then we can end off of that.
Oh, we're picking.
Yeah.
Not leaving it up to chance.
We can't leave it up to chance. What would you like to do?
No, I'll pick a good one for you.
You'll pick a good one? Okay, I'll pick a good one for you too. I've played this game before, so I feel like there's a...
Oh, okay, I've got one. Is it just one each?
Yes, one each.
Oh, okay. Personally, I think level 2 is even better than level 3.
Really?
In my experience.
In your experience? Okay. You pick some level 2 ones if you want.
No, I've got one for you.
Okay. Oh, okay, I have one. Funny enough, you're right. In this case. Yeah. In this case. Okay. I have a question. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Or do you want me to go first? I'll go first.
Okay.
All right, I have a question for you. What could you benefit from letting go of? Why are you still holding on?
The thing that comes to mind relating to the topic today is like, so I lead the product management club at UBC.
Yeah.
And recently made the decision to step down as president. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was like a big deal because this was like the last 2 years of my life that when I was procrastinating on school, this is where I was spending my time.
Yeah.
On this community.
Yeah. It was like your baby almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I literally dedicated full-time hours to it during some periods leading up to some major events that we put together. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot that I went through because of it. But one thing that I've been reflecting on is that I'm probably not actually that good of a leader.
Really?
I think that I am in some ways where it's like I really try to be like open and upfront with the people I'm working with, and like I try to lead by example. Mm-hmm. But I still have this tendency to be doing a bit of everything.
I see.
And I've never been able to let go of this kind of perfectionist tendency of like, this is how I want this event to look like that we're organizing, or this our website for our club, or this graphic that we're posting on social media. I need it to be approved by me. Yeah. And like, I don't like this wording. Yeah. And I try to give feedback. I try to give people like the opportunity to like step up and try it themselves. Mm. But in reflection, I'm like, what would this club look like if I wasn't here? Mm-hmm. I don't want to just make it my, my organization. And that was one of the main reasons why I decided to step down and help with the transition after me. I think it's important to be, when you're a leader, that leadership is not just what you're doing to inspire others, but what you can help other people do. Leadership ideally should be you making other people into leaders. Mm-hmm. That then you should get rid of your own job almost, And I'm just I've been really not willing to give up this idea of like everything needs to be the way that I see it. Yeah. As much as I like to say that, I'm okay with other things, it's like, it's really tough for me. And I've noticed that have an effect on the team because everyone feels like they're not okay with creating things for the club when they don't get my approval to create them, I think. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really kind of proud of some of the people that are going to step up into leadership positions after me now, because they're people who are not perfectionists, and it bugs me in a way. Yeah. But it's like they understand that the best thing to do a lot of the time is just to like just make stuff happen. Yeah. And like we don't always have to put our best foot forward, but we should keep putting our next foot forward. Yeah. And there's a lot of discomfort that I feel because of that. Yeah. But I know that it's what matters most, and I really want to get better at like letting go of perfectionism. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's such an awesome answer. I also resonate with that. I really like the quote that you mentioned, right? Like it's not about putting your best foot forward, it's about putting your next foot forward. Is that actually a quote? I just thought of that. We can make it a quote now. I like it because best is subjective. Your best may be different from someone else's best. And I've also had instances where I've worked with people and, they like show me things and I'm like, but, I would change this and this and this and this. Also like, pretty analytical kind of guy. And I think for me at the end of the day, if it gets its job done one way or the other, then that's what really matters. And yeah, that seems like a great milestone. And you know what they say about discomfort, right? Like you got to be uncomfortable to learn and grow from it. So yeah. Yeah. All right, I've got a question for you, Andy. Hit me. What have you learned to accept about yourself with time?
There's a lot. There's a lot that I can say. I think the answer that sticks out the most to me is that this difference between being lonely and being alone. And the reason that sticks out to me is because there are certain activities that I've tried that I would have never tried before in the past. For example, like this is a while ago, but I went to a movie just alone. I went to eat out just alone. And for some people that's normal. Like, you know, you want to go eat something, right? You just go eat out. But I don't really eat out that often, and I cook at home or I meal prep. And so doing those things for the first time was very, very uncomfortable. So I guess I'm not really answering your question because that's the difference between being alone and being lonely. The answer to your question that I would give is it's okay to be lonely. Not even just alone, just lonely. Because people say like, oh, it's normal to be lonely. But for different people, that loneliness, what I've learned recently is that the intensity of the loneliness varies from person to person based on their past experiences, based on what they've been through. And for me, it's like relatively bad. And so I've learned that it's okay to be lonely because everyone's lonely. And I understand like my own circumstances better now. And that there are things that you can do in order to mitigate that, right? Like treating yourself properly, like self-care, and that it's and I think expectations also comes with that as well, because what I've realized recently is that sometimes I place unfair expectations on people with regards to relationships, like friendships and all that, people's availabilities, people's like why aren't you responding as quickly as I want you to? And so I think those things are something that I've come to accept more and more of. And I think if you were to tie all the little things up top down to one thing, it would be like the loneliness factor. So yeah, things aren't in my head, and in an ideal world, right? It's like, oh, we're just never lonely. But it goes back to that mindset of if you are happy all the time, then are you really happy? Because there's no contrast, right? There's no like, you know, if sadness didn't exist. And so I think that's something that I've come to I constantly revisit from time to time. Yeah.
And you now embrace these different emotions.
Embrace different emotions in terms of what?
Like when you're sad, you want to feel sad. When you're lonely, it's like, it's okay to be lonely.
Yeah, it's not perfect. For sure, it's not perfect. I think in an ideal world, I'd like to get to that point, but that's something that I'd say I'm working on and I'm getting better at. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm curious if you felt the same too, because when you are in your room all the time, which I have also had experience with, you know, that tends to hit you eventually, right? This feeling of like, oh, I should talk to people, but then you're like, oh, but I don't really want to talk to people. I just want to stay in my room.
It's not that I want to stay in my room.
Oh, really?
It's that I can't get off my ass and get out.
Really? Okay.
It's like I'm staying in my room, occupying myself with a screen in front of me with maybe YouTube or some like email or some task. Mm-hmm. To distract myself from what I actually could be doing. Oh. And I haven't decided what I want to do. Mm-hmm. So I just stay and continue to distract myself. Mm. But on the note of like feeling emotions, this is something that I've come to appreciate a lot, is like when I'm sad, I'm like, yeah, I want to cry right now. You're like, oh, man, I haven't cried in a while. Like, I want to feel this, you know?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
And sometimes you just like, you put on some tunes, you like really get into it. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm happy, I want to be present in that moment. Mm-hmm. You know, I feel like there's a lot of good times that I've had recently that I really want to appreciate in the moment. Hey, I'm really enjoying spending time with these friends. And when in the past, like when I had all this stress on me, I was just thinking about, okay, what's the next to-do list item, you know? So now it's like, give me all the emotions. I want to taste them all. Yeah. Oh, there's another color of the rainbow here. Like, let's try it. Let's try it.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Skittles commercial. You know, taste the rainbow.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's one thing I've been trying. But when I'm in my room, I'm distracting myself. I'm like feeling nothing. Yeah. And I want to go out there and as my friend Kai would say, he's like, all right, let's go. Let's like experience some shit. Let's get fucked up. Yeah. Even like getting fucked up does not mean getting drunk. It means like let's experience some emotions. Let's like actually get outside of our comfort zone and experience something new, and not just like let this day be another day in the book. Yeah.
I really like that reframe, because a lot of times when people say let's get fucked up, they're talking about, getting drunk, getting wasted. Like, I think discomfort is something that we should embrace more of. Like just trying things you're not comfortable with and doing things that you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah. I've had too many days that are just another day that nothing happened in. Whereas like now it's like, all right, what experience do I want to have today? Or even like, maybe you don't even know, but you put yourself in a situation where it's like, okay, this is going to be an experience. Not sure exactly what kind of experience. The other day I did a hip hop dance class for the first time. I have literally zero dance experience. It was really challenging, and I didn't feel that amazing afterwards because I was just so frustrated at my inability to be coordinated at all. But then I had some friends that we went together with, and like we just like got sushi afterwards. We talked deep stuff, and then I'm like, okay, that was another experience. And so just saying yes to things, even if they're like a little bit outside your comfort zone, that's a sweet spot. Like, give me more of that. Like I want to experience it all. Being less picky, because like you haven't tried shit if you're young.
Build up that experience. And with the dance thing, like I feel like I can also relate to this, because when you try new things, I'm also into like trying new things, and when you do try new things, you're inexperienced. So everybody's been at that point at some point in their lives when they do get good, right? Like everyone starts somewhere.
Here's the number one thing that I've noticed about myself, about my tendencies, is that I mentioned my default is to be in my room, kind of distracting myself and just doing work or watching YouTube or something. And I'm really have never been great at like initiating things. Like, hey friend, do you want to go to this dance class? Do you want to grab food? Do you want to like go bike around Stanley Park? I've never been that person.
Okay.
Even in my relationship, it just was never really the one initiating all of that. And if you're someone who just like keeps letting life kind of go by, each day is just another day of the week, you have to find some way to like prompt action for yourself, like prompt something new, because otherwise nothing's going to change. Even if you want things to change, nothing is going to change. I've realized it's just going to be another day of me in Toronto, going to work, going home, the 9 to 5. So you got to put something like in your calendar that's like, all right, this is going to prompt something new, some kind of event that's like, all right, I don't know what's going to happen after this. Like it could be bad things, could be great things, but like take some risk. And if you're not someone who does that naturally, like maybe find other people that will bring you those prompts, those offers of like, let's go do this, and then say yes to them. But that's the one thing I'm working on, of like trying to get better at, is like, how can I not just rely on these external prompts of like other people offering to do things, and be someone who like prompts myself internally.
I see. Because it sounds like you've had other people to prompt you. I'm kind of the opposite. Like I initiate all the time, and the issue that I've had is making sure your expectations are in check, because sometimes I am like, oh, why is this person not initiating back? So that, but I think in terms of initiating, it's just like, just got to do it. Like, as dumb and simple as that sounds, it's what happens. You just do it, and then it's like,
Turns out life is a lot simpler.
All
the things my mom used to tell me, I'm like, go outside, play with your friends, get some fresh air.
Usually that's
get some sunlight. Eat food,
Yeah.
Exercise, breathe. These are pretty good things.
Breathing is good.
It's not actually as complicated as you might think, but it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to do.
It's simple but hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's a good note to end on. Do you have anything you want to plug, like your startup? You never mentioned what you did for your startup, but if you want to mention that, you can, and then we can end.
Our startup is called Prompt, and what we're trying to do is make it easier for you to follow up after a first conversation with a card kind of like this one. But it's whether it's like someone you're just meeting at an event, or say you're a salesperson and you want to like convert, an in-person conversation into a sale with a potential customer. We're still really honing in on our niche there, but the idea is that everyone always forgets to follow up after an event. You always forget, like, you had this great conversation, but then you went and talked to like a bunch of other people, and it's like, it's so much work to follow up. We want to make that way easier than it is right now. So instead of following up afterwards, you can follow up in the moment with a card that has a unique QR code on it. Every QR code goes to a different website. So I can share something specific to our conversation. And the way it works is that I get to scan the QR code and choose what I want to share with you and what we should do together next. I'm providing you with different prompts that you can choose to take action on if it's something that you want to do together with me. So really making it easier to prompt action for two people. And it's different from a business card. A business card is like, hey, here's more about me. It's like, here's my website.
Yeah.
This is more about what we can do together next. So that's what we're experimenting with right now.
Do you guys have a website?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet.
But maybe by the time this is out.
Send me the link. I'll put it in the description box if people are curious.
We're really in the experimentation phase right now, but that's the concept.
Yeah, the cool thing about it, and I've seen you use it, is that you can, like, the customizable QR thing, right? If I want to send you my LinkedIn, I can be like, oh, toggle everything off except LinkedIn. And then if I want to send someone to my Instagram, I can be like, oh, toggle everything off but Instagram. So I thought that was like probably the coolest thing. Yeah.
But ideally, you're sharing more than your LinkedIn and your Instagram.
Exactly.
The things I share are like, hey, let's get coffee, or let's get lunch,
like your calendar link or something.
Or like, hey, I really enjoyed talking to you about product management.
Yeah.
Here's like my guide for reading books on PM, or like getting a PM internship.
Yeah.
Because this is specific to our conversation. There's certain things that you tend to want to do with people or share with people.
Yeah.
Maybe I talk to them about going climbing. So like, hey, let's like go climbing together at the climbing gym, and it's a link. So there's certain things that you want to do with other people, and this just makes it like 10 times easier to actually do those things with people. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, on that note, thanks, Scott, for coming on. And check out, I'll put a link to your thing if you have it, your startup, down in the description box below. Thanks everyone for listening / watching, depending on what platform you're on. And we'll see you later. Bye. You want to say bye too?
Goodbye.
Bye.
I wasn't sure which camera.
Look at all the cameras. Yeah. All right. See you later, guys.